The gospel text of today is taken from the Gospel of Mark chapter 2 verses 23 to 28. And the scene is this. Jesus and his disciples are passing by grain fields. And even as they are passing by, his disciples pluck ears of corn, rub them in their hands to remove the husk, and are eating that grain. There are people who are watching them, the religious leaders, the righteous people, who complain that they are doing something which is wrong because that day is the Sabbath day. And so the question is, what is the wrong thing which the disciples are doing? Why were they not allowed to do it on the Sabbath day? There were 39 forms of work which were forbidden on the Sabbath day. And one of the forms of work was preparing food. Food had to be prepared before the Sabbath day or after the Sabbath day, not on the Sabbath day. And therefore, this was regarded by those who watched Jesus as the preparation of food, because the disciples were rubbing the ears of corn in their hand. So their complaint to Jesus is, the disciples are breaking the Sabbath law. The disciples are breaking the Sabbath rule. They are not being true to the law and the keeping holy the Sabbath because they are preparing food. Jesus responds once again in defense of his disciples, because the allegation is not against Jesus but against his disciples. In the example that Jesus gives, he speaks of how David and his army reached the place of the high priest. In the temple where the high priest was, there were the loaves which were known as the loaves of presence, which only the priest could eat. David, of course, was hungry, and so were his men. So even though David was not a priest, he went into the temple, took the loaves of presence which only priests were allowed to eat, and he ate them and also gave it to his men who were hungry. And the point that Jesus makes by giving this example of David is that the hunger of a person, the need of a person takes precedence over the law. In the case of David, even though he was not ritually allowed to eat, even though by law he was not allowed to eat, he went beyond the law because his hunger, the hunger of his men, preceded the keeping of that law. In the case of his disciples, Jesus says the point is the same. However, Jesus goes even beyond that when at the end of the gospel text of today, he speaks of himself as the Son of Man, who is the Lord even of the Sabbath. What does it mean? It means that the Sabbath is made for the human person and not the human person for the Sabbath. As long as our interpretation is that the Sabbath is all important, as long as our interpretation is that the rule is all important, that day we are lost, and we need to find ourselves again by reading what Jesus says about this rule and regulation. The rule and regulation, no matter how important it is, no matter how holy it is only meant to take us from God to God and from God to human beings. If it takes us away from human beings, if it takes us away from God, if it makes us bitter, if it makes us judgmental, if it makes us label others, then it is a rule which we must review. It is a rule which it may be necessary to give up. The rule never is an end. Will you realize that rules will only be means to an end and never the end.